Hello and welcome back to this video. The topic I'm talking about this time is etymology, and it was suggested back in April by Flaw of Averages, which is their username on OpenStreetMap, so I don't know who they are. And I think it is very interesting for a lot of people who are interested in place names and why places are named thus. And to quote my professor of language history back when I was studying linguistics in Leipzig, who used to say, if you understand language history, you understand the world, which is partly true, but it surely helps to know a bit about language history. The tag is name etymology, and then there's some subtags that you can use. And in this video, I'm going to talk about street names. I will do another one about townland names and then one about field names, or the other way around. I also have two special guests, two flies that are flying around behind me, and they're super annoying and they're probably going to distract me. But they're all God's creatures, so what can you do? So I will talk about Kilkenny, because I know a bit about the history. So this is probably going to be more about the history of Kilkenny than really mapping, because there's only 2 or 3 tags to use. So I'm going to just talk about the streets that I'm mapping, and I'm doing it in a kind of chronological order. So I'm starting with the medieval street names and then moving along to the 18th, 19th, 20th, no, not 20th century. Don't really care so much about that. We will start with High Street, because that is something that most people, or a lot of people, will have been on a high street and walked along and maybe wondered why it's called High Street. If you're not Irish or English and you're not familiar with the concept, so the High Street is usually a medieval street that connects 2 major parts of the town, or the city even, but usually just the town, because when they started off they were towns. In Kilkenny it's the castle and St. Canice's Cathedral, so that's the connecting street between the two. It does change its name a couple of times in Kilkenny, even more so now than it used to. So at the castle, it's Castle Road, then the Parade, then High Street, Parliament Street, Watergate, Irish Town, and then up the steps, which is not really a street anymore, St. Canice's Steps. But Parliament Street used to be called High Street at some point, but it was renamed. And you find them in England and probably also in Scotland, I presume, and Wales and in Ireland, because it's a medieval thing. This is me in the editing room now, because I made a bit of a bollocks explaining what High Street is. So the High Street in the UK and in Ireland is the main street where most of the shopping took place in the Middle Ages, up until people got cars and forgot how to walk. And now they were also built in medieval times when there weren't any lorries going up and down high streets delivering, and no SUVs. So the shopping has moved to shopping centres, and people don't really use the high street as much because it's not convenient anymore. And High Street it's called High Street because it denotes like it's the best street in town, like high society. And sometimes it might also have been a bit higher up than other streets, like in Kilkenny certainly did. High Street was higher than what is now Kieran Street, but at some point it was called Lower Lane, I think. Oh, that's the explanation I can give you. Back to the mapping. And we'll go into High Street. So you can use name : etymology, and there you just explain the etymology. I think it was introduced more for modern street names, where you have the name of someone and maybe you're not sure is that referring to this politician in this country, or is it referring to an artist of the same name, or whoever, sports person. I don't know how often they name streets after sports people. Scientist. And then just to clarify who it is actually named after, people have introduced the name etymology tag. And then you can also add name : etymology : Wikidata, and you can link to that person or that event if it's named after an event, like, I don't know, in Russia and these kinds of places they have, and probably also China, like the Street of the Great Revolution or something like that in Russian and Chinese, which I don't speak sufficiently to give you an example. But for example, in Germany we have the, I've forgotten the date now, some revolution that happened in June, but there are a couple of streets in East Germany that are named after that event. So it would be like the street of the 7th of July or something, or 4th of July or something. And so we'll start with High Street, and I have looked it up before, and I'll add the etymology, name colon etymology, and then name colon Wikipedia, which is also a possibility. If it has, sometimes they have a Wikidata entry and a Wikipedia entry, and sometimes they only have one. So High Street starts here at this crossroads and goes all the way up to where it meets James's Street. The reason being that when the Normans came and settled in Kilkenny, this is where their area ended. James's Street was the boundary, and then later on, I think I mentioned that in a previous video, they got more land from the Bishop of Ossory, who was in St. Canice's Cathedral. They swapped for land in Ahabo, I think, which is where St. Canice's came from, or lived before he moved to Kilkenny. And then it extended to the River Brega, and that was English town or High Town. But that's why High Street ends here, and it used to end further down here, but then they renamed it into Parliament Street, and other names before that. So we're going into OpenStreetMap, obviously. I'm logged in, and I'm going into Edit, and I'll have to highlight all the bits of High Street, which is split a couple of times for, maybe it's not, but it could be. So you just have to be careful that you, no, it's not split. Like if the speed limit changed, or if the surface changed, we would have to have it split to accommodate all the different types of surface and speed limits and stuff like that. So this is all highlighted now, and I scroll down here. It has also the name, the Irish name colon GA. Just saying that name colon etymology colon Wikipedia, and the Wikipedia page is this, and this refers to High Street in general, not the High Street in Kilkenny, because then it would be just Wikipedia without the name etymology. I don't think it has one. I think I made a Wikidata entry though. Let's check. Of course, there are going to be loads of high streets. High Street. Oops. Because it's a very common name. Just have to find the right one. Maybe if I type in Kilkenny as well, that might help. Yeah. So I'll just click on that. So you have the label High Street, and then a description, which I also filled in, Street in Kilkenny, Ireland. And then you can also add different translations. So I could add the German translation for Street in Kilkenny and the Irish, if I knew the Irish. And then you have some statements about it. It doesn't have an image because I didn't take a picture. I didn't want too many people in the picture, so I didn't take one. But we can take this Q number here, which is the Wikidata identifier, and copy that and put that in under Wikidata. And this is to describe the street, not the etymology. I don't think there is a general one about High Street. Doesn't look like they're all specific high streets. And I don't want to scroll through, I don't know how many are there. It doesn't say. Anyway, I don't want to scroll through that at all. So that's the first one, High Street. The next one is Patrick Street, which is what it's usually known as now. Used to be St. Patrick Street. And that's the one also starting from this crossroads. That's just it's probably not a coincidence, because it's the historic centre of Kilkenny. So you see I have to choose several parts. So you can do just one by one, or you hold your shift key press and then choose the next bit and the next bit and the next bit and so on until you have all of them. You might have to move the map to get all of them. And just make sure that you only have... See, I must have highlighted something that isn't Patrick Street, because it should say Patrick Street under name now. So I'll just go back and maybe do them one after the other. And it's named after... let me do the first part first. It could be that... Why is this called High Street? Oh, maybe it is. Maybe Patrick Street starts here. Actually, that's looking better. Yeah, and if you look over here... Okay, so up to here, it seems to be just Patrick Street, because then I think it's Upper Patrick Street. That might be it. So you see here, name, it says Patrick Street, and then I have also filled in earlier, last week, name 1841 and name 1871. So that's old names. You can use old name, but if it changed its name a couple of times, you're better off using a date. And I found those on maps from 1841 on 1871. It obviously doesn't mean that it only had that name in 1841. But those are the maps I used as references. So now, name etymology. And it's named after St. Patrick's Gate, which was here, roughly, somewhere. And it's called St. Patrick's Gate because it led up to St. Patrick's Church, which was at some point here in this graveyard. Well, let me type this first. After St. Patrick's Gate and St. Patrick's Parish. Okay. So this is St. Patrick's Graveyard. This is the oldest part of Kilkenny, this area here somewhere. So around this graveyard. Stonagmore is the townland, and that's usually a sign that it's a really old area. And so there was a church somewhere here, then it was here, and part of it is turned into this house here, and then they built a new one over here. But it's still St. Patrick's Parish, which doesn't have a Wikidata entry, so I can't add the Wikidata name : etymology Wikidata, and also not name : etymology Wikipedia, because it also doesn't have a Wikipedia entry. So there we go. Can't do that. I'll save that now because I don't want to move it around with all this data open. Added name etymology. Because it can happen that I accidentally grab one of the street lights or a bin or something and move that instead of the map, and I don't want to do that. So the next one is Abbey Street, which is down here, and it's called Abbey Street because it leads down to the Black Abbey. And it used to be called Abbey Lane, and then it was upgraded to a street, and it was also called Lee's Lane at some point, because I presume someone called Lee, one of the merchant names in Kilkenny, must have had a house up there, and there was also at some point a Lee's Asylum, which was a poorhouse, or an almshouse, like the Shees Almshouse, which is almost the only one still surviving. But there was a Lee's Asylum, and I presume that was also on Lee's Lane. Not quite sure. And but now it's called Abbey Street because it leads to the Black Abbey. So I have a Wikidata entry for that, the Black Abbey. So we'll go into the map now again. And of course there's also the only surviving gate in the town wall is the Freren Gate, which is named also after the Black Freren or the Dominicans. So again, I have to highlight the whole Abbey Street, which is split at the gate. And then the street is also partly the townland boundary, which is probably wrong. Because the city wall, you can see this line here with the little triangles, that's how the city wall is rendered. Or a town wall. It doesn't really matter on OpenStreetMap if it's a town or a city. Does matter for Kilkenny people. So go down here. Name etymology. Black Abbey. I hope that's enough. And then name colon etymology colon Wikidata. There's the fly. And paste that. And there is probably also a Wikipedia entry, yeah. So when you go to Wikidata and you have the correct number, just a bit of a mess on Wikidata as well. But usually you should get a list here of Wikipedia entries in different languages. So there's one here for EN if you're English speaking and it is in an English speaking country, like Ireland, then it probably makes most sense to use the English Wikipedia entry rather than the German or French or Italian. So you can copy that name here, or that title, that link, and then type in name etymology and Wikipedia should come up. And then again, it's very important to have the language code first, EN, if it is the English one, and then you can paste that link. And that should work. The next street is, I'll save that first, just in case. Added name etymology. The next one is Blackmill Street, which is this one here. And it used to go straight across the Brega River here and joined Botts Green. But then they built the roundabout and it all changed. So I'll go in, it goes all the way from there up to James's Street again. And I'm not entirely sure where the Black Mill was. It's named after the Blackfriars or the Dominicans, because they owned the mill, I presume. And I think it was here. So the street would have led to, maybe it did go around, I'm not sure. But there was certainly a bridge here. So maybe it went around here and led to the Blackmill Street. So often streets are named after what they lead up to, which building they lead up to. And that's in a medieval context. But you still get Dublin Road and these kinds of things and Cork Road because eventually they lead to Dublin or Cork. Okay, so name, etymology. No, not Wikidata yet. The demolished Black Mill owned by Dominican friars or something like that. And there's no Wikipedia or Wikidata entry for it, so we can't add that. While we're here, James's Street, might as well do that. So James's Street starts on High Street and goes all the way up to James's Green. And it's called James's Street because there used to be a St. James's Chapel or church here on James's Green. And it's one of the churches that Bishop Ledred had demolished after the plague in 1348 because a lot of the parishioners had died and he figured they didn't need the church anymore. But he needed a palace, so he demolished them and took the stones and built his palace, which is the Bishop's Palace, which now houses the Heritage Council. But if you know what you're looking for, you can kind of still see that there was a tower house at some point, and if you're lucky enough to get in, they might even show you. So James Street, name etymology, demolished St. James's Church demolished after Black Death in 1348. And of course there was also a James's Gate. and you went through that to get to St. James's Church. I don't think there's Wikidata or Wikipedia because it's gone. So save that again. Bishop Ledred is the bishop that was very involved in the Alice Kittler witch trial. He was a big fan of witch trials and not so much of women, I suppose. Which makes it easier to not get involved with them inappropriately. So Magdalen Street is this one here. So we're gone across the River Nore, John Street, up John Street, and then to the right is Magdalen Street, and the older name is Magdalen Street, because there was, you guessed it, a gate called Magdalen's Gate, which was here, I think, somewhere. So we still have Magdalen Castle, and there was also a church, Magdalen's Church, somewhere here, I think, where all the lepers went. And while I have it down that is named after Magdalen Castle, I can just put both in, I suppose. The gate's no longer there. There's a tower here. And I found out looking at old maps that this little lane here actually had a name, which is now just a footpath. And it was Watch House Lane. It must have something to do with the gate, I presume. And then it was Whitewash Lane, I think. I think that got the whole street. So you see, I have the name in 1757. That's from the Joan Roques map of Kilkenny, 1757, Magdalen Street, and he spells a lot of the street names wrong, but that's what's in the source. He's the source, so you have to spell it like that. It's okay with Magdalen Street, but he calls Walkin Street Watkins Street, and he calls the Watergate Waltergate. He was French, maybe he just misunderstood. And in 1871 is already Magdalen Street. So name etymology. Either after Magdalen Castle or Magdalen Magdalen's Gate demolished. And then name etymology. Wikidata. I prepared that earlier. So there's Magdalen's Castle, and we even have a photograph, so it's a tower house. And we can use this Q code here. And name etymology Wikipedia. We can use this link here. So even if you're German and you're watching, you can look this up and read about the castle in German. Or if you're Ukrainian. I probably won't provide Ukrainian subtitles, I usually don't. But I do try to get German subtitles, usually. And Michael Street, which I didn't look up on Wikipedia before. Same story. There used to be a Michael's Gate somewhere here, I presume. And it's named after that. And it used to be called Michael's Lane. But it also got upgraded. So name etymology. Demolished Michael's Gate. Which means, following the pattern of all the other street names that are named after gates, that there must have been a St. Michael's Parish here as well. And Bishop Ledred demolished 4 churches. St. James's was one. I think St. Nicholas's was one in the Butts. Or maybe St. Thomas, because there's still Thomas Street. And I don't know if Michael Street was one as well. I didn't look that up. So that's the Middle Ages done now. We're moving on to the 18th century, to New Building Lane. There is a persistent belief that New Building Lane is named after the third house, the so-called third house, which is really the second, of Roath House, this one here, where it says Kilkenny Archaeological Society Library. Because John Roth in his will in 1619 refers to it as his new house or building. But, as I've said earlier, often streets are named after buildings that they lead up to, and you have to have access into that building. And I don't think there was access from New Building Lane into the third house. You had to go through this footpath here, or come in. There was an entrance into the what they call Outskill, this bit here, up here and in there. But also, what's speaking against that theory is that it wasn't called New Building Lane until 1871. Anyway, way after the Roth family had left and come back and left again. And so there's a building here that's called New Building, and it's still called New Building, even though it's from the late 18th century, second half of the 18th century. But that's the New Building. And I believe, and other historians, I'm not a historian, but other people who are actual historians believe that it's named after that. And before that, it was called New Row because they built a new row of houses. And this name has now moved behind here, where they have built even newer houses. It's a bit confusing. There's a lot of roads that at some point within the last, 600 years were called New Road or New Street in Kilkenny. And then they built a newer one. It's like the St. Francis's Bridge. Everybody calls it the New Bridge or the Bridge, depending on where you stand politically. So anyway, New Building Lane. I have actually created a Wikidata entry for this building, which is also a registered monument. So, and I even put the German translation there. So this is roughly what it looks like. It's very difficult to take a picture of it because it's just a lane. There's not a lot of room to step back and take a picture. But that's what it is. I didn't write a Wikipedia article. Didn't want to go a bit over the top. So we're going in, highlight all the pieces, which it is split here because it goes under or through a house. I think I got everything. Name etymology. After the new building. I haven't thought this all through. After the 18th century new building. And then name etymology. Wikidata is this one here. And there's also a plaque on the new building because it was derelict and then they rebuilt it under, I think Tony Patterson was the mayor at the time. So we're jumping around a bit in Kilkenny now because we're jumping through history. Barrack Lane is the next one. So Barrack Lane is named after this building here, which is now the Butler Gallery, but back in the Middle Ages, it was part of John's Priory. And then, of course, Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monasteries and all that. Then it became, I think first it became the barracks, and then it became Evans Home, which is another one of those almshouses. And then last year, 2 years ago, it became the Butler Gallery. And it's partly designed by William Robertson. Well, that's just a side note. So Barrack Lane. And I prepared for this one and I've already formulated it so I can just copy and paste. And name etymology. And it just says what I've just told you. I don't have to say it again. And we'll save that. I think there's also a Barrack Street which leads up to, let's check, which leads up to the newer barracks. Yeah, Barrack Street is up here because it leads to those barracks. If you want to add that in your own time, be my guest. The next one then is Jail Road, which is here. And It is named after Kilkenny Jail, which is also demolished. But there is a memorial stone here, which I've mapped, and it was here somewhere. And it was also designed by William Robertson. But it's gone. So I typed in leading to former jail site. Name etymology. And I also created a Wikidata entry. Name etymology Wikidata. Even though it is demolished, but I'm hoping that maybe at some point somebody will find a photograph and upload it to Wikicommons and then I can link it. So I have no image there because it's demolished and I can't go back in time and take a picture. But I also have the date when it was demolished, which I got, I think, from that memorial stone. Some of the stones, as far as I know, were used to build Nolan Park. So this is the Wikidata. And we'll save that again. I think it's especially important to record what streets are named after if it's named after a demolished building, because it's not obvious anymore because it's gone. Just to prove a point, Brokemakers Hill led to a pub or an inn that is also demolished now, and it was the Brokemakers Inn. When I moved to Kilkenny, it was still there, but it's gone now. So this is Brokemakers Hill, and I think it's actually probably a quite old road as well, because I mentioned that in an earlier video. Greensbridge was here at some point. You see Green Street is here, and it used to go straight on here across the River Nore, and then it joined up here. I think I remember now when I mentioned it, because you see the house numbering here is all off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then it starts again, instead of just continuing on. And I think that's because, and I said that in the old video, because the street continued on here. And this was just one street and it wasn't interrupted by the new road. You see the pattern there? Yeah, so that's why. So Brokemakers Hill. And I've formulated that previously, so I can just paste again, leading to the former Brokemakers Inn, or the former site, the site of the former Brokemakers Inn, something like that. Name etymology. I seem to have created a Wikidata entry for it as well, because it was I think it was a protected monument, I'm not quite sure. No image, because there's none on Wikicommons. If you have an old photograph that you took yourself of the Brokemaker, please upload. Name etymology Wikidata. And save. So I don't know what century we're in now, because I'm not sure when the Brokemaker was built. If you look at old maps, there is something on old maps in that location, and I think the road to Castlecomer, the old Castlecomer road, was Greens Hill, and then they built the new Castlecomer road. But maybe it was a place where you changed horses and these kinds of things. I think that's enough for that kind of a time. Then we have Hebron Road, which is also sometimes, where are we? Here. Some locals call it Hebron Road. I don't know. Happens. But it's Hebron Road, and it's named after Hebron House, which is here, because it leads to Hebron House. And I have created a Wikidata entry for it as well, because it is a protected structure. And I think it's for sale at the moment. And this comes in pieces, because we have to go across the roundabout. I seem to have highlighted something I didn't want to. Yeah, it's split a couple of times because, sometimes the road is also the townland boundary. Keep highlighting the wrong thing. So you just have to be very careful. Okay, I think I have it now. And also when you highlight a road and you zoom out a lot, this is all that's going to be shown. Just fun fact. So much fun. Name etymology. Oh no. Leading to Hebron House, and then name etymology Wikidata. Just to make sure I have the right thing. Yeah. Maybe it's not a farmhouse, maybe it's more like a mansion. But you see I have the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage number added here as well. And I can paste that. Save again. And then the last one I want to do is Parnell Street. I read somewhere that's how it's stressed. It's Parnell, not Parnell. Everybody says Parnell, but apparently it's supposed to say Parnell Street. Named after Charles Stewart Parnell. So it's this bit here. The old name is, I think, is it Flood Street? Yeah, it used to be called Flood Street. Charles Stewart Parnell. So I think it's these kinds of cases that this tag was introduced for. Politicians or important people in history, mostly men. I haven't looked him up on the old Wikidata, but there he is. But I did have his Wikipedia link, which I didn't really need. Because it's here somewhere. So that's some of it done. Of course, there are way more streets in Kilkenny and some that I would be really interested to know why they're called that, but I didn't do my research. A lot of this information, if you're in Ireland and you're lucky enough, you might find it for your town in the, what's it called now? The Historic Towns Atlas, Irish Historic Towns Atlas, AHTA. I'll look it up and put it on the screen. Sorry about that. And I think Kilkenny was actually one of the first, and John Bradley worked on it a lot, and he researched all this and found out why they're all called what they're called. Some are still debated, like William Street. Nobody really knows why. It's not a King William. It used to be called Bolton's Lane, and it was much wider because all this was, I think there was a quarry here. And there was an inn or a pub called William something, and there was also a William Williams living in it. But we don't really know why it's called William Street. I would like to know Points Lane as well, if anybody knows. Cross Lane is quite common. It's usually a connecting lane that you get in medieval towns. And Chapel Lane obviously leads to a chapel, but it used to be called Shortall's Lane, after, again, one of those Norman families, the Shortalls, on the, what's he called? The John Rokes map. I think he misspelled it again. Shortsall, I looked it up today. Can't remember now. I think it's Shortsall's Lane or something. Yeah, Shortsall's Lane. That's what he calls it, which is probably not what was meant. Because then later on it is called Shortall's Lane. And but there was a church up here. Don't know which name there was. A St. Bridget's church here is believed to have been here, and I think, well, there must have been a St. Mary's church here at some point. Yeah, but to leave Kilkenny, I want to show you one other thing. Because when we were, was it, now I don't remember if it was Newry or Derry. I think it was Derry. We were mapping up here somewhere. Yeah, exactly. So we were mapping up here. Here. And I thought, hold on now. These names all sound very familiar. O'Donovan Road, Petrie Way. Not all of them sounded familiar, but I thought it's all Colby. They sound Griffith, sorry. They all sound like surveyors, like the first generation Ordnance Survey people. And I looked all the names up, and I can't remember if I already added the etymology to these streets. I might have, but that was also one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video. So that's a nice bow to all these first generation surveyors, Ordnance surveyors, to give them all streets up here. I don't think there's any O'Donovan Street anywhere in Kilkenny. I think you might have a school named after him, because he was from Kilkenny and he was big into place names. So I hope you found that interesting and learned a bit about Kilkenny history and medieval town history. And I'm looking forward to running an overpass turbo query to see in a couple of weeks if you've added your own etymologies. Well, not your own, don't make them up, like do your research. But you know what I mean. Your own edits on etymology of street names. And it's not limited to Ireland, of course. And I'm not quite sure how to deal with, like, sometimes they might have different names in Irish and English. I mean, obviously, because it's two different languages. But there might be a different etymology in the English and in the Irish. I'm not quite sure how to deal with that. If that would be name : GA : etymology. Because those kinds of tags weren't made for Ireland. They were made for probably the States or somewhere where people don't have that kind of a problem. But anyway, hope you found it interesting, and I hope to see you in the next one, which will probably be about field names, because I'm going from the smallest to the largest, I think. And see you then. And I hope you're having a good winter's time. And slán.